The wind came down off the butte, sharp as bone, curling through the boards of Elias Hollow like a ghost with no name, and Miriam Holt didn't rise to meet it. The sky had turned to pale brass by mid-morning, the kind of color that made a man spit twice before riding out. But Miriam stood still, boots planted in the soft earth beside her gate, watching the empty road through half-lidded eyes. The gate creaked, swinging wild on a rusted hinge that had once been tightened by her husband's hand. It hadn't held a man's grip in 5 years, and still it swayed like it was waiting for one. She kept her arms folded across her chest, thumb rubbing the edge of a frayed cuff that used to be blue, now sunburnt to the shade of worn parchment. Behind her, the barn loomed like an old soldier, spine crooked, shoulders slumped, doors open just enough to catch the wind and let it whistle through like breath in a broken reed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. A memory drifted to her like smoke from a campfire that had gone cold. James, standing in that very spot, oiling the saddle with care, singing some hymn he barely remembered the words to. That was before the fever took him, before the war medals were stuffed in a drawer, before the townsfolk looked at her like a story they couldn't explain. They still nodded polite when they saw her, but no one asked how she was managing. Not really. A woman running land alone made folks uneasy. More than coyotes ever did. She felt the weight of the bridle in her hands, a heavy leather loop worn smooth by years of grip. Ash, her late husband's war horse, stood just inside the barn, ears back, tail twitching like he knew what the sky already whispered. The wind shifted, and with it came something else. Hooves, not the steady rhythmic beat of a neighbor riding out to check fence line. No. These sounded different, scattered, fast, reckless. 5 sets by her count. She stepped forward, hand still resting at her hip, though no iron rested there anymore. They came over the ridge like a brush fire, dust trailing like a signal flag behind them. Riders in strange coats, hunched low with the kind of ease that said they weren't worried about being met. At the center of the pack rode a tall figure in a red duster, silver buckles running like teeth down its front. A long rifle was slung over his back, casual, careless, dangerous. Miriam didn't move. She squinted into the light, letting the sun do half the work of keeping her face unreadable. They slowed as they approached the fence line. Ash stamped inside the barn. The air tensed. The tall man tipped his hat. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, voice slick as warm molasses. She didn't answer. "You got water?" he continued, feigning cordiality. "Maybe a story or two to swap while we rest the horses." Miriam's voice came low and flat. "Ain't got stories, and I sure as hell don't have water for thieves." The smile that stretched across his face didn't touch his eyes. Now that's not neighborly. He swung off his horse, boots landing in the dirt with a soft thump. He walked toward her with the arrogance of a man used to getting what he wanted. Dust clung to his coat like pride. "Silas Vane," he said. "Maybe you've heard the name." She hadn't, or maybe she had, and decided it wasn't worth remembering. Behind him, the other men shifted in their saddles. One lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. Another chewed something dark and spat into the dust. Silas tilted his head toward the barn. "That's a fine horse you got. Looks army bred." "He is." "Well then," he said, eyes gleaming. "He'd ride just fine with the Thornback riders." Miriam's jaw tightened. "He ain't for sale." "I wasn't askin'," Silas replied. She moved then. Barely. A twitch of her hand toward her side. Muscle memory, long dormant. But there was no colt there, just an ache where one used to sit. Silas saw it and smiled wider. He let out a shrill whistle. 2 of the men dismounted and made for the barn. Miriam bolted toward them, fists clenched, but one caught her by the arm, spun her hard, and threw her down. She hit the post with her cheek, sharp and fast. Dirt filled her mouth. The wind kept blowing, unbothered. Ash screamed, A high, panicked whinny, struggling against the halter as they dragged him out. One of the men cursed as the horse kicked, but they held fast. Leather stretched, wood cracked. Miriam shouted, voice breaking. "You don't know what you're stealing!" Silas was already mounting. From the saddle he looked down at her, eyes full of nothing. "Lady," he said, "I reckon I do." They rode off in a cloud of red dust and snapping laughter. Ash's cries echoed long after the hooves faded. By dusk, the wind had softened. The blood on her cheek was dry now. Miriam stood in front of the saloon with her back straight, eyes hollow. Folks gathered in clusters near the steps, murmuring. Sheriff Tobin Gragg leaned against the rail with a cup of something that steamed. He chewed tobacco like it gave him answers. She stepped close. "You need to go after them." He didn't look up. "You ain't shot. Barn ain't burned. Let it lie. He's all I have. The law says they're long gone." He spit. "Best you move on." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Curiosity. Shame. None of it useful. No one met her eyes. No one offered a saddle or a hand. She walked back through town, slower than she'd come. Elias Hollow swallowed her like fog. The barn was a hollow shell without Ash. She stood in the doorway, fingers on the splintered frame, and stared at the halter hanging empty. Later she sat at the kitchen table, lamp burning low. A tin of coffee sat untouched beside her. The photograph rested in her palm. James in uniform, her beside him, coat too big. Both of them grinning like the world wasn't trying to ruin them. The house didn't creak. It just breathed. She rose slowly, moved to the hearth, and knelt. With practiced fingers, she pulled up the loose board. The wooden chest beneath was older than the town. Inside, a sawed-off shotgun wrapped in burlap, a small pouch of .44 cartridges, a worn leather belt with an empty sheath, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilskin, a tarnished badge. Bent, scratched, still solid. She held it in her palm for a long time. Not yet. Morning came without ceremony. She didn't go into town, didn't open the storehouse. She split wood in James's old coat, sleeves rolled. The mule watched her with bored eyes. By nightfall, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, cleaning the revolver. The oil smelled the same, like purpose, like the woman she had once buried. She slept light. On the third morning, she saddled the mule. Grit snorted in protest, but didn't fight her. He was slow, but he was steady. She walked him to the gate and stopped, touched the post once, a gentle brush of fingers against old wood. The wind caught the corner of the photograph tucked into her coat. Then she rode west, slow and silent, following the trail left by Ash's hooves, faint indentations in the dirt, curved like memory. The desert watched. It didn't offer blessings, but it didn't turn her back either. That night, Miriam pulled the floorboard up and found what she'd buried 17 years ago. The old tin badge still bent from where she'd stepped on it, trying to forget who she was. Miriam hadn't worn the badge in 17 years, and it didn't shine anymore. But then again, neither did she. The first rays of light spilled across the canyon floor, long and pale, cutting between the shadows like ribbons on a dead man's gift. Miriam rode slow, her figure small against the swollen land. The shape of her past still clinging like burrs to her coat. Grit, the old mule, trudged without complaint. His pace was steady, deliberate, each step planting itself with the weight of age and memory. The badge hadn't come with her on her chest. Not yet. It remained tucked inside her coat pocket, close enough to remember, far enough not to forget why it was bent in the first place. She'd tried once to melt it down. Couldn't. Tried to bury it again once, too. But dirt doesn't take lies kindly. Not out here. Beside her, the air carried no sound but the scrape of hooves over rock and the occasional rustle of lizards darting beneath dry brush. Somewhere high above, a buzzard cut across the sky, coasting on a pocket of hot air, silent in its knowing. The road was nothing but the memory of a trail now, just the faint marks left by Ash's hooves, 4 days gone. Miriam had learned long ago how to read signs in silence. A scuffed boot print, a broken mesquite limb. A heel dragged just slightly deeper on the left, which meant whoever rode him was heavier than James had been. She didn't need to see Silas Vane again to know what kind of man he was. His type had swaggered across her life more than once, all noise and trophies, hollow behind the eyes. Ahead, the terrain changed. The trail curled near a bluff, where the air shifted and the smell of scorched wood crawled up from below, like breath from a dying mouth. She dismounted and led Grit along a narrow ledge, boots scraping against the stone, her hand steady on the reins. As they turned the bend, the shape of a homestead emerged. Its bones blackened, its walls half-eaten by fire. The wind whistled through an open window, glass long gone, shutter dangling like a broken limb. Miriam tied Grit to a post still standing and walked toward the house. The front door swung crooked, hanging by a single hinge. She stepped inside. Chairs overturned. The remains of a meal lay spoiled across the floor, maggots weaving lazy circles in what used to be bread. A child's rag doll sat charred near the hearth. Miriam's eyes narrowed. She stepped further in, shotgun cradled but low, boots whispering against the dusty plank floor. The silence had a thickness to it, not the calm kind. This was the hush that follows horror, the kind that sticks to the ribs. She called out softly. "Anyone still breathing?" Nothing. Then, faint, beneath her, a whisper. A cough. Miriam dropped to one knee, pressing her ear to the floorboards. Another whisper, barely formed, reached her. She moved quick. Her fingers found the loose plank by the hearth, lifted it, and beneath the floor, she saw him. A boy, thin as rope, eyes wide, face streaked with soot. He stared up at her like she might disappear if he blinked. "It's all right," she said, lowering her voice. "I ain't here to hurt you." He didn't speak, didn't move. Miriam reached into her saddlebag and pulled a strip of jerky, unwrapped it slow, and held it out. "Here," she said. "You got to eat if you're gonna talk." The boy took it with shaking hands. She eased him out of the hiding space. He winced, one foot dragging behind him. The right leg was bent wrong at the knee, swollen and purpling. Behind him, she heard a groan. Faint. From the back room. Miriam stood, shotgun ready. She stepped through the narrow hall to what used to be a bedroom. The man on the bed, likely the boy's father, was still breathing, but only just. His eyes fluttered, and his lips moved around a word that didn't make it past his tongue. The bandage wrapped around his chest was soaked through. "He tried to stop him," the boy said from behind her. "Told him no. They beat him anyway. Took his rifle, said we didn't need it." Miriam moved to the man's side, her fingers light on his pulse, weak. She poured a few drops of water into his mouth. His lips trembled, then settled. "They gone west," the boy said. Said something about following the canyon, then heading to Broken Stone Pass. She nodded, eyes still on the man. "Your mother?" she asked. The boy looked down. Buried her after the last frost. A silence fell between them. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer, just kept chewing the jerky, jaw stiff, gaze hollow. "You got anyone else?" she pressed. He shook his head. Miriam rose slowly. She walked back into the main room, where a sack of feed lay half-spilled near the back door. She pulled it upright, filled it with what she could salvage, jerky, beans, a water skin, and returned to the boy. She knelt beside him again, resting the sack at his feet. "There's a town east of here," she said. 3, maybe 4 miles. Name's Dry Rock. Find a man named Henry Moss. He runs the blacksmith's shop. Tell him Miriam Holt sent you. He'll know I mean it." The boy stared at her. "He's kind. And he owes me 2 favors." She reached into her coat and pulled out an old Union cavalry medal. The brass was dulled, but the engraving still legible. She pressed it into the boy's palm. "You show him this," she said. "He'll keep you safe." He held it like it was made of glass. "Your father's a brave man," Miriam added softly. "He stood when others wouldn't." The boy's chin quivered, but he nodded. "You going to stop them?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Miriam stood, adjusting the strap of her shotgun. "I'm going to end them." She stepped out into the wind before the boy could say more. The light had shifted again, turning the canyon gold. The trail ahead lay scorched and uncertain, the dust curling like smoke from an old fire. That night, Miriam made camp beneath a jutting rock wall where the stars felt sharp enough to cut skin. She didn't light a fire. Instead, she sat with her back to the stone, shotgun across her knees, and pulled the photograph from the inside of her coat, not the one with James. This one was older. She stared at the image, herself standing before a gaudy tent with bold letters behind her, reading, "Deadeye Holt, the sure shot of the Silver West." She couldn't have been more than 25 in that picture, wearing a skirt with a gun belt slung low, a smile on her lips like she owned the horizon. In her hand, a rifle gleamed, polished and proud. She remembered the way the crowds roared when she split a bullet on a silver dollar mid-air, the way men muttered under their breath that it wasn't proper, that a woman shouldn't shoot like that. But money didn't care about propriety, and neither did she, until she met James. He'd taught her to shoot for reasons that weren't about show, to aim not for applause, but for what was right. Together, they hunted men the law couldn't reach. She wore the badge then, not because she needed it, but because the job needed her. When they settled in Elias Hollow, she buried the name Deadeye Holt like it was poison, took James's last name, became a wife, a rancher, a woman who cooked stew and planted beans and didn't speak of the blood that once soaked her boots. Now, the dust had stirred it all up again. She tucked the photograph away. Sleep came light and slow. Her hand never left the shotgun. The canyon would not be kind to the Thornback riders, and Miriam didn't plan to ask it to. That night, beneath a cut of rock blacker than coal, Miriam lit no fire. But she laid the Colt across her knees and waited for the sun to bleed again. They said Red Devil's Ridge was no place for the living, but that's where she was headed, and she wasn't riding for company. The morning sun broke late over the jagged land, slow and shy, like it too feared what lay ahead. Miriam Holt sat atop Grit, the old mule steady beneath her, tracing the final twists in the trail that cut toward the canyon's mouth. Below, the land fractured and folded in on itself, steep walls rising like rusted teeth, shadows clinging thick between narrow passes. Wind skimmed the ridge, high and hot, carrying dust and the faint stink of smoke. Fresh smoke, not the ghost of old campfires. She leaned forward and rubbed the mule's neck, eyes fixed on the curve ahead. Once, long ago, a traveling showman asked her how she could shoot so well. She'd answered, "Because I don't blink at the truth." Right now, the truth lay somewhere inside that canyon, with 6 men too sure of their own shadow. Her hand brushed against her coat, where the badge still sat hidden. It hadn't left her pocket. Not yet, but it sat heavier than before. The signs were clearer now, tracks in the dirt, hoofprints deep and lazy from unbothered horses, a sliver of jerky tossed aside, the print of a boot with a heel worn low and a spur notch worn smooth. Silas Vane's gang had made camp here without worry. They weren't expecting anyone to follow, certainly not a widow on a mule. That would be their first mistake. She led Grit off the trail, tethering him under a thorn-limbed juniper where the branches cast enough shadow to swallow him. He brayed softly, uneasy, but didn't protest. Miriam pulled her rifle from its sling, checked the chamber, then crept along a ledge until the canyon's curve dropped open before her like a wound. There they were. 7 of them, camped in the bend of the ravine, a lazy fire coiling smoke upward. Horses stood tethered nearby, mostly asleep, ribs showing through their sides. Ash stood apart, close to a flat-topped stone. Miriam's breath caught for just a moment. He was thinner, coated in dust, but still standing proud. She could see the welts on his flank, the way his ears flicked at every sudden movement. Closer to the fire, the men sprawled in patches. One stoked the coals. 2 more played dice with laughter that rang out too loud. Another man dozed, hat tipped low. A 5th leaned against a boulder, sharpening a blade with long, slow strokes. Silas Vane sat in a camp chair, red duster open to the heat, a bottle swinging from one hand, boots propped on a crate like he was king of the canyon. Miriam's jaw set. She studied the ground, gauging distance, slope, cover. There was a trail leading out the far side, a bottleneck perfect for an ambush. If they were to leave, they'd have to ride through it. But first, she needed to scatter the horses, make noise, spread panic, let confusion do half her work. Before she moved, something shifted. A figure peeled away from the camp and walked toward the rocks, one hand fumbling with his belt. A young man, barely more than a boy. Skinny, pale, his boots too large, his steps uncertain. Miriam slid back, waited until he rounded a stone outcropping. Then she stepped from behind a boulder, silent as dusk. The colt pressed against the nape of his neck before he even knew he wasn't alone. He froze. "Make a sound," she whispered, "and it'll be your last." His hands lifted slow. The knife on his hip dangled uselessly. "Where's Silas headed?" she asked, her voice low, flint and gravel. I don't know. Just west. He don't tell us much. Just rides, camps, drinks, talks like he's got plans." "You been with them long?" He hesitated. 3 months. She studied him. Boots loose, belt barely hanging on his narrow frame, eyes wide like someone who'd never fired a shot at anything that wasn't already running. "You killed anyone?" He shook his head. "You go back to Elias Hollow," she said. "Take the South Ridge. Ride till the river. Don't stop until you see cottonwood trees. If you're lying, I'll find you." I swear, I didn't want no part of it. They said there'd be money." Miriam lowered the colt. "Then don't spend it. Ride." He bolted without another word, stumbling over rocks before disappearing around the bend. Miriam watched until the wind swallowed him. 6 left. She moved fast, retracing her steps along the ridge. She spent the better part of the afternoon preparing, gathering dry brush, soaking it in a ragged flask of lamp oil she'd carried since winter. She rigged it just beneath the trail exit, where she knew they'd flee if the fight turned. She placed stones at the edge of the bluff, piled high and balanced precariously. If someone passed through too fast, they'd fall. Not fatal, but loud. She'd need noise when the time came. Then she returned to the horses. They were tied with thick rope near the far wall, out of view of the main fire. Miriam crept close, whispering low. Her voice was steady, measured, like it had been in another life. The horses shifted, but didn't panic. She untied 1, then 2, then 3, moving slow, brushing hands along flanks and manes, her scent calming them. The 4th horse she slapped gently on the rump. It bolted. The others followed. A yell from camp. "What the hell?" Then came chaos. Men shouted. Boots pounded. Dice scattered. A pot clanged to the ground. Miriam was already behind a stack of crates, shotgun braced and ready. One of the riders ran blindly toward her cover, eyes on the stampede. She stood, calm and sure, and pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the canyon like thunder against stone. He dropped without a word, his body folding in on itself before it hit the dirt. Silas roared, his voice rising like a bear startled from sleep. His revolver came up, firing wild. One shot slammed into a crate beside her, splitting wood and shaking her arm. Another man stumbled into view, rifle half raised. She fired again. He spun, hit the ground hard, and did not move again. Smoke curled from the barrel. The acrid scent of powder filled her lungs. "Goddamn Holt!" Silas shouted, rage thick and ragged. "You got some nerve, woman." She stepped out from behind the crate, shotgun reloading with a clack and click that echoed like a drumbeat. "You stole from me," she said. Silas laughed once, bitter and thin. "You came all this way for a horse." A bullet screamed past her ear, tearing through the air. She didn't flinch. A third man rose from behind the fire pit, aiming. Miriam's revolver came up clean, and she fired once. The shot tore through his shoulder. He dropped his rifle, screaming, curling into himself like a scorched letter. "I came for what's mine," she said, "and for what you did to that boy's father, and the others you left bleeding." Two of the riders turned and ran. No words, no orders, just the raw instinct of cowards faced with truth they couldn't outdraw. They scrambled up the ridge, disappearing like ash in wind. She didn't follow. Cowards would carry shame longer than any wound she could give them. Silas ducked behind the overturned camp chair, firing again. Another bullet grazed her coat, tearing cloth but missing skin. She moved low, fast, a silent figure darting behind the supply tent. Her boots barely whispered. She circled wide. He didn't see her until it was too late. She stepped through the flap like a ghost, quiet and sudden. The muzzle of her Colt pressed against his temple. He froze. "Drop it," she said. He did. Slowly he turned, eyes narrow. "You really think you're going to get out of here clean?" he hissed. "I'm not looking for clean," Miriam said. "I'm looking for done." She reached down, ripped the revolver from his belt, then cracked the butt of her gun across his face. He dropped to one knee, blood streaming from his mouth. "Strip," she ordered. "What?" "Your boots, your saddle, your pride. Take 'em off." He stared at her, rage blooming in his jaw. "I'll kill you for this," he growled. "No," she said. "You won't." His hands shook as he unlaced his boots, then tore off the red duster. Buttons catching. She made him drop everything in a pile, hat, belt, coat, until he stood there in his long johns and socks, the canyon wind turning him into a silhouette of humiliation. Miriam tied his hands behind his back, then mounted Ash. The horse didn't fight her. Not this time. His eyes were calm. He knew who she was. Silas looked up at her, hate burning in his throat. She met his gaze, cold and steady. "You walk out of here barefoot," she said. "Let every town between here and Elias Hollow see what's left of the man who thought he could steal from a widow." He tried to speak, but whatever words he reached for died in his mouth. She turned Ash, slow and deliberate, and rode past the wreckage of the camp, past the blood, the groans, and the silence of men who knew they were nothing now. She didn't look back. Silas's voice rose above the chaos, raw and furious. "You think you'll ride away from this, widow?" From behind the crates, Miriam answered calm as church bells. "I ain't riding. I'm cleansing." The ridge burned red beneath the rising sun, and the canyon swallowed every sound except the click of Miriam's boot against stone. She walked slowly now, each step careful, each breath measured. The hard ground of Red Devil's Ridge scraped beneath her soles as she crossed the camp, a stillness settling in the air that didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause after lightning, when even the wind holds its breath. Behind her, Ash stood watching, ears perked, coat slicked with sweat, but unbroken. Around her, bodies lay still, or not still enough. The ambush had shattered the camp like a bottle tossed against rock. Smoke hung low, lazily curling from the extinguished fire, where bits of blackened jerky still hissed on the edge of the coals. The two horses that hadn't bolted circled wide near the canyon wall, noses flaring, hooves twitching. Miriam had spooked them good, just enough to keep them from charging, but not so much they'd scatter completely. She might still need them for the walk back. She glanced toward the pile where Silas Vane's coat lay crumpled, red duster folded like a shed skin. His hat sat beside it, dirty and misshapen, with a trail of blood spattered on the brim. A fitting crown for a king gone to rot. He wasn't far. She'd tied his hands with leather cord, cinched tight enough that his fingers would stay purple for hours. He knelt near the fire pit, shirt torn, jaw bruised, his long john streaked with canyon dust and his pride leaking from every ragged breath. The others had run or fallen. She'd counted 2 men gone, one left whimpering by a rock, clutching his bleeding shoulder, another curled beneath a wagon wheel, sobbing into the dirt. The cowards would live. So would their shame. Miriam stood over Silas now. The look he gave her was half fury, half disbelief, as if he still couldn't reconcile what had happened. That a woman, a widow no less, had undone him without fanfare, without a posse, and without mercy. He tried to speak. His lips moved around a word, but it caught on his tongue. She said nothing. Instead, she knelt beside him, pulling the red duster into her lap. Her fingers ran over the silver buckles, tarnished now, one missing, and tugged gently at the seams. It had been stitched by hand, not factory work. Likely a woman once cared enough to sew those hems. The irony was bitter in her mouth. Silas shifted. "You think you've done something noble here?" he rasped. Her eyes moved back to his face, slow and steady. "I didn't come for noble," she said. "I came for finished." "You're just another outlaw now." "No," she said. "You mistake justice for vengeance. Easy thing to do when you've never met either." He spat blood to the side, a crooked smile growing through the pain. "You won't make it back. Not with the town knowing." Miriam rose, slung the duster over her shoulder, and turned away. She didn't need the town to know. The land would. She spent the next hour walking the perimeter, kicking through their belongings. There wasn't much worth saving. Bent pots, a half-empty flask, a map so faded the ink bled through. But she found one thing that stopped her cold: her husband's old knife. She recognized it by the notch at the base of the hilt, the place where he'd carved their initials back when love was still young enough to need carving. James plus aus M. She closed her hand around it, letting the weight settle in her palm. When she walked back toward Ash, Silas was still kneeling, eyes glassy now, sweat beading across his forehead. The morning heat had begun to press down, like a thumb on the skull. "You gonna kill me or not?" he said, voice barely more than a rasp. She swung herself into the saddle without answering. Ash shifted beneath her, eager to go, eager to be gone from this place that reeked of failure and rust. "No," she said at last, looking down at Silas from the saddle. "Killing you would be a kindness," he snarled. "Then what's this? Humiliation?" "It's clarity." Then she turned Ash toward the narrow trail out of the canyon and began the slow descent. Silas's curses followed her for a time, then faded into the red dust like all empty things do. The ride out took longer than she'd expected. Not because the trail was bad. It was, but because she stopped every so often to look back, not out of doubt, but to make sure the silence was holding. She didn't trust quiet where men like Silas had slept. As she reached the ridge's end, the sun lifted higher, throwing long shadows that danced across the rock walls like memories. She let Ash rest beneath a crooked mesquite, brushing his mane with slow strokes, whispering to him in a voice that had once soothed cattle and broken men alike. "You're all right," she said. "You came back to me." He nudged her chest, warm breath puffing against her neck. The trail widened then, and Elias Hollow lay far in the distance, just a smear of gray against the dusty horizon. She'd need to ride half the day to reach it, but she wasn't in a hurry. She passed by the place where the Thornback riders had left their tracks, wide wagon scars from stolen freight, hoofprints from hard turns, all of it fading now. Time had a way of chewing up the stories of men who thought they were too big to fall. It was nearing midday when she crested the rise just before town. Ash moved with steady grace, hooves quiet on the packed earth. The wind shifted again, warm and dry, curling around her ankles like an old friend come to walk beside her. The outskirts of Elias Hollow came into view first. The collapsed fence, the leaning church with its bell rusted in place, the saloon where the piano hadn't played in years. She saw movement behind curtains, shadows leaning against porch rails. They were watching. They always watched. But no one stepped out. Not yet. She didn't slow as she passed the sheriff's office. Greg stood out front, arms folded, mouth pressed into a line. He didn't look surprised to see her. He nodded once, shallow, barely visible. "You bring trouble with you, Miriam?" he asked. She met his gaze. "No," she said. "I sent it limping the other way." He looked past her, maybe hoping to see a posse or a string of prisoners. "Crowley alive?" he asked. "Mostly," she said. "He's walking. No boots. No name left to curse." Greg almost smiled. Almost. "Suppose that's justice, then," he muttered. "It'll have to be." He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't offer help. But he didn't stop her either when she nudged Ash forward and continued through the center of town. The saloon's doors creaked open just enough for a pair of eyes to follow her. The feed store's porch groaned under a figure that stepped back into shadow. No one spoke. But silence, Miriam knew, could be louder than any sermon. She reached her ranch just as the sun dipped behind the first bluff. The barn still leaned to the east. The gate still sagged on its hinges. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. She dismounted, her legs stiff, her bones tired in that way only a reckoning could bring. Ash walked into his stall without a fight. He let her brush him down. His eyes soft with something she couldn't name. Inside the house, the lamp still sat on the table, the tin of coffee untouched, the photograph face down where she'd left it. She sat, laid the shotgun on the table, set the knife beside it, then reached into her coat and drew out the badge. It glinted dully in the low light, edges bent, surface scratched. She turned it over once, held it in her palm. Her hand didn't tremble. She didn't put it on. She put it away. She packed her saddlebag at dawn. Left the gate unlatched. No one saw her leave, but they all watched the dust trail stretch west. Silas Vane walked barefoot into the wind, stripped to long johns and fury, and the canyon didn't bother to echo his name. The morning after Miriam Holt left Red Devil's Ridge behind, the land seemed quieter, as though the world itself had taken a breath. What smoke remained from the Thornback riders' campfire had thinned to threads. Ravens circled overhead, not for blood, but for memory. There was no legacy left in that canyon, only dust and the slow crawl of regret through scattered boots and spilled bullets. Miriam rode east with the sun at her back. The horizon stretched like an old scar she'd never quite traced to the end. The path toward Elias Hollow lay open now, the way unbarred by threat, but no victory rode beside her. Only Ash, steady and bruised, ears flicking as though the silence itself might sneak up behind him. Her hands held the reins loose, not careless. Just tired. She didn't rush. The trail bent and shifted beneath the hooves, climbing slowly through scrub-brushed gullies and flat mesas baked gold by the spring sun. Insects buzzed. Once a jackrabbit darted across the path, and Ash jerked, but did not spook. They rode in rhythm, horse and woman, stitched again by the thread of survival. The duster Miriam had taken from Silas now hung in the saddlebag, its red dulled by sand and sunlight. She hadn't worn it, didn't plan to. Some things belonged to the dead, even if the man was still breathing. By the time she crested the bluff overlooking the western edge of Elias Hollow, the wind had picked up. It whistled low across the plain, rustling the weeds that grew through the boards of abandoned fence lines. In the distance, the church steeple leaned like an old man with a tired back, and the bell, choked with rust, hung crooked in its cradle. No bells rang in Elias Hollow, no voices called out. No children ran between posts, no dogs barked at the edge of town. But she knew they were watching. Always, they watched. She didn't ride fast, didn't try to hide the blood-spattered cuff of her coat, or the tear in her sleeve from Silas's bullet. Her face was smudged with dirt and sun. Her eyes were unreadable. Windows shifted. A rocking chair creaked once, and then stilled. Miriam passed the general store, then the saloon, then the old post office that hadn't sent a letter since the war ended. Each building bowed slightly toward the road, as if ashamed of its own weight. She turned Ash toward the sheriff's office, where a plank of porch sat shaded and splintered. Sheriff Tobin Gregg stood there, chewing a reed, boots crossed at the ankle, arms folded like he'd been waiting. "Thought you'd be back yesterday," he said. "I wasn't in a hurry," she replied. He looked her over, gaze lingering on the shotgun tucked behind her leg and the red duster hanging limp from her saddle. "Crowley?" he asked. "Walking," she said. "Might be somewhere near Sand Hollow by now. He'll make it to the border. Maybe." "He armed?" "No," she said. "No boots either." The sheriff scratched his chin. "Some men'll say that ain't justice." "Then they don't understand justice," she answered. They stood there for a while, not speaking. Wind moved across the boards. Somewhere a door clicked shut. "Suppose you'll be wanting me to make a report," he said at last. "No need," Miriam said. "He'll tell the tale himself." Gregg's brow raised. "That so?" She nodded. "Let 'em see him. Let them ask what kind of man comes back barefoot and beaten. That'll do more than a rope ever could." Gregg didn't argue, didn't nod either, but he stepped aside, letting her ride past without comment. She turned Ash toward the edge of town. The buildings thinned. The air tasted of cedar smoke and dry earth. She passed the place where her husband used to mend tack for neighbors, before they stopped calling. Past the broken hitching post where she'd once tied Ash after riding home from the fair, back when laughter came easy and the town hadn't learned to flinch from her shadow. By the time she reached her gate, the sky had begun its turn toward gold. The horizon smudged with the coming dusk, and the air carried the scent of distant fire. Ash walked through the open gate like he remembered it. She led him to the barn, unsaddled him with care. Brushed down the dirt and blood, and fed him oats by hand. He didn't flinch, not once. Inside, the house sat quiet, exactly as she'd left it. The coffee tin remained sealed on the shelf. The photograph lay where it had always laid. James in uniform, herself beside him, half smiling at a future that would never be. She sat at the table, laid the knife beside the oil lamp, folded the red duster across the chair, then reached into her coat. The badge waited, cool and bent. She turned it in her hand. Not to wear, just to know it was still there. She placed it in the drawer, closed it, then stood. Outside, the stars began to prick through the velvet dark, one by one. She walked back to the barn, laid her hand on Ash's shoulder, and rested there a moment, eyes shut. Then, without fanfare, She saddled him again. Packed light. No lantern. No food beyond what fit in one pouch. No weapons but the colt and her own resolve. She rode slow through the yard. Stopped once at the gate. Looked back. Didn't cry. Didn't linger. Some houses weren't meant to hold you forever. Some ghosts needed space. The town, as she passed, said nothing. But they watched. They watched her ride out, coat flapping behind her, hair wild in the wind. Watched her like they might never see her again. And none dared ask where she was headed. She left before sunrise. The wind that once took her horse now carried her name, and in towns where no law dared ride, they whispered it like prayer. Miriam Holt. They said a woman passed through Coyote's Spire in the spring of '87, alone, silent, and trailing the kind of dust no wind could claim. The tales didn't agree on the color of her coat. Some swore it was blue like twilight. Others said it burned red like the devil's own. But all agreed on one thing. She didn't speak unless she had to, and when she did, the room got quiet, like thunder was waiting. By the time she rode in, most folks had already heard whispers out of the east. Elias Hollow had seen something that left the wind changed. A sheriff with a different tilt to his spine. A postmaster who blinked a little slower when asked about outlaws. No one offered much, just that a name, Miriam Holt, was beginning to travel faster than the rail lines. Coyote's Spire wasn't much of a town, just a scatter of dry buildings, a half-working trading post, and a graveyard that grew every spring. It sat in the crook of two bluffs, where the wind made a sound like a distant harmonica, and vultures circled lazy over stone. On that morning, the woman came riding in with the sun at her back, hat low, coat worn, and her horse darker than the trail behind her. She stopped near the watering trough, leaned down without dismounting, and let the horse drink. The trading post door creaked open, and the old stage driver, Amos Bray, stepped out, squinting. She didn't look like much, he told it later. But I seen a cannon fire once and it was quieter than she was. Miriam didn't stay long. Bought a few cartridges, replaced a canteen, left a silver coin that had been notched at the rim, a cavalry mark, old and earned. The shopkeeper tucked it into the cash box like it was made of myth. Not many noticed the way she turned back once, glancing toward the slope behind town. There was a church there once, back before the roof fell in and the bell cracked clear through. Nothing left now but scorched stone and a single row of pews too warped to sit on. Miriam rode up anyway. Stood for a while beside the ruin. Then she dismounted, walked through the broken doorframe, and laid her hat on the highest headstone. It bore no name. She stood in the chapel's hushed quiet, where the wind still knew how to whisper prayers. A gust moved through the rafters and caught the edge of her coat, lifting it gently like the breath of something forgiven. No words were spoken. She left the hat behind. Farther north, beyond the hills, a boy stood outside a clapboard house with a split chimney and a garden that hadn't yet bloomed. His leg was set in a splint now, the bruising gone to yellow. He leaned on a crutch made from fence post pine, watching the road. He'd been placed with a rancher's widow, a hard but fair woman named Hattie Griggs, who believed in bread before talk and work before pity. She didn't ask where he came from. She knew better. But she gave him space, and meals, and even a pencil with paper once she caught him drawing in the dirt. That morning, he was waiting. When she rode past, far off across the ridge, he saw her. She didn't look back. But he straightened anyway, standing as tall as he could, and lifted the medal she'd given him, held it up like a flag, like a name, like something earned. The woman did not stop, but the boy smiled. "I ain't scared no more," he told Hattie later. She took that with her. In another town, 2 days' ride away, a farmer came across a man lying half-conscious by the riverbank. clothes torn, feet blistered and bleeding, eyes sunken. He didn't carry a name, just the weight of a red coat too big to wear, and a mouth that refused to explain. The farmer offered him water, but not a ride. "Whatever you're running from," the farmer said, "looks like it caught you already." He left the man there and didn't look back. At a relay station near Dead Elk Crossing, the night clerk sat cleaning a rifle when a stranger passed through. She didn't speak, didn't tie her horse, just left a folded paper on the counter. It was a wanted poster, old, torn at the edges, faded with time. The face on it was barely visible, the ink bled out by years. But the name at the top had been scratched out with a knife, replaced by 4 simple words: "Not worth remembering." Back in Elias Hollow, things did not change overnight, but they shifted. The saloon stayed quiet after sundown. The sheriff kept to his office more, rode out more often than he used to. Someone fixed the church door. The gate at Miriam's ranch got mended by unseen hands, and people started talking again, soft at first, but steady. Not everyone believed it, but some did. Somewhere beyond the old rail trail, Miriam rode alone. The sky above her turned the color of iron as dusk fell. She didn't chase the wind, but she didn't let it catch her either. Her saddlebag was lighter now, her weapons cleaned and oiled, her back straighter than it had been in years. She passed a family fixing fence post, nodded once, didn't speak. She passed an old woman dragging water from a well. The woman paused, stared, then smiled as if she'd seen a story ride past. And in a burned-out chapel far from any town, a widow knelt to light a candle for a husband buried too young. She'd heard a tale, a whisper, about a woman who didn't run, who took something back from the kind of men others avoided. She lit the candle and let the flame hold a name. Not hers, not the one who died, but the one who carried justice quiet as a prayer. That night, as stars came out sharp against the sky, a different wind blew. It didn't howl. It applauded. The story becomes something more, not about revenge, but permission. A woman defended what was hers. Others now believe they might do the same. And so the wind keeps on moving across the high places, brushing the ridges and hollows of a land that still remembers names long left behind, and somewhere out where the sun slips slow behind jagged stone, and the night creeps in like a whisper through old window panes, the dust still tells her story, not loudly, but surely, with every hoofbeat that echoes where law once failed and silence once reigned. And if you listen closely in the lull between coyote howls and porch boards creaking, you might still hear it, soft, firm, like the rustle of calico skirts against saddle leather, or the hush of a breath held too long, waiting to become courage. And you'll remember how her hands didn't shake when the time came, how the badge stayed in her pocket, not out of shame, but out of wisdom. How the red duster never touched her shoulders because some symbols were better buried, not worn. And the boy who stood tall on a crooked crutch with a medal in his palm. And a woman who found a hat on a nameless grave and left it there without asking who it belonged to. Because deep down, some truths don't require answers, only recognition. And the mule named Grit who carried something heavier than supplies, a history, a burden, a chance at redemption. And the horse named Ash who never turned from her, not even after fire, not even after blood. And the townsfolk of Elias Hollow who didn't cheer, didn't applaud, but opened their doors an inch wider after she passed. Because sometimes a quiet example does more than 100 sermons, and that burned chapel in Coyote's spire, its pews cracked, its bell stilled, but still echoing the footsteps of a woman who didn't pray for peace, but became it, and a name scrawled on the corner of a torn map no longer marking a place, but a person. Miriam Holt, not outlaw, not legend, just a woman who remembered how to aim, and who used that aim to return something the West had long forgotten, dignity, not taken by force, but reclaimed by grace, and you'll find that maybe, just maybe, there's still a place in this old world for the kind of justice that doesn't ride with a posse, but rides alone, that doesn't need a headline, but needs a witness. And maybe it doesn't matter that some folks won't believe it, because belief ain't the measure of truth. Action is, and sometimes it only takes one person to keep the truth alive, not with words, but with what they choose to leave behind. A gate left unlatched, a hat resting on stone, a silence that hums with something unfinished, something sacred. And maybe that's the lesson we carry long after the campfire dims and the story folds into itself, like twilight over the plains. That honor can be buried, but not erased. That justice may come late, but it still matters. And that the forgotten woman, the quiet woman, the woman who didn't ask for glory, may just be the one who saved a generation of kindness, not by preaching, but by proving that you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to ride, steady, true, and willing to carry what others dropped. And if this tale stirred something in you, if it reminded you of someone you used to be, or someone you hope to become, then leave a sign behind. A word, a gesture, a name whispered to the wind. And if your heart still beats for the kind of stories told by firelight, for truths that travel on horseback and values stitched into dust, then saddle up beside us again, friend, and subscribe to our channel, where we keep the trail open for stories that remember, stories that matter, and stories that ride slow, but ride forever.